Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we continue with Part 43, Irish Societies, Book 13, Political Secret Societies, from Secret Societies of All Ages, Volume 2 by Charles William Heckethorn. 15. Irish Societies, 658. The White Boys, Ireland, helpless against misery and superstition, misled by hatred against her conquerors, the rulers of England formed sects to fight not so much the evil as the supposed authors of the evil. The first secret society of Ireland, recorded in public documents, dates from 1761, in which year the situation of the peasants, always bad, had become unbearable. They were deprived of the right of free pasture, and the proprietors, in 7 cases out of 9 not Irish landlords, but Englishmen by blood and sympathy, began to enclose the commons. Fiscal oppression also became very great. Reduced to despair, the conspirators had recourse to reprisals, and to make these with more security, formed the secret society of the White Boys, so called because in the hope of disguising themselves, they wore over their clothes a white shirt, like the camisards of the Cévennes. They also called themselves levelers because their object was to level to the ground the fences of the detested enclosures. In November 1761, they spread through Munster, committing all kinds of excesses during the next 24 years. 659, Right Boys and Oak Boys. In 1787, the above society disappeared to make room for the Right Boys, who by legal means aimed at obtaining the reduction of imposts, higher wages, the abolition of degrading personal services, and the erection of a Roman Catholic church for every Protestant church in the island. Though the society was guilty of some reprehensible acts against Protestant pastors, it yet, as a rule, remained within the limits of legal opposition. The vicious administration introduced into Ireland after the Rising of 1788, the burden of which was chiefly felt by the Roman Catholics, could not but prove injurious to the Protestants also. The inhabitants, whether Catholic or Protestant, were subject to objectionable personal service, hence petitions rejected by the haughty rulers, tumults quenched in blood, whole populations conquered by fear but not subdued, and ready to break forth into insurrection when it was least expected. Therefore the Protestants also formed societies for their security, taking for their emblem the oak leaf, whence they were known as the Oak Boys. Their chief object was to lessen the power and imposts of the clergy. Established in 1764, the society made rapid progress, especially in the province of Ulster, where it had been founded. Unable to obtain legally what it aimed at, it had recourse to arms, but was defeated by the royal troops of England and dissolved. 660. Hearts of Steel, Threshers, Break of Day Boys, Defenders, United Irishmen, Ribbon Men. Many tenants of the Marquis of Donegal, having about 8 years after been ejected from their farms because the Marquis, wanting to raise £100,000, let their holdings to Belfast merchants, they, the tenants, formed themselves into a society called Hearts of Steel, thereby to indicate the perseverance with which they intended to pursue their revenge against those who had succeeded them on the land by murdering them, burning their farms, and destroying their harvests. They were not suppressed till 1773, when thousands of the affiliated fled to America, where they entered the ranks of the revolted colonists. The legislative union of Ireland with England in 1800 did not at first benefit the former country much. New secret societies were formed, the most important of which was that of the Threshers, whose primary object was the reduction of the exorbitant dues claimed by the clergy of both persuasions, and sometimes their conduct showed both generous impulses and grim humor. Thus, a priest in the county of Longford had charged a poor woman double fees for a christening on account of their being twins. The Threshers soon paid him a visit and compelled him to pay a sum of money with which a cow was purchased and sent home to the cabin of the poor woman. This was in 1807. Government called out the whole yeomanry force to oppose these societies, but without much success. Political and religious animosities were further sources of conspiracy. 2 societies of almost the same nature were formed about 1785. The first was composed of Protestants, the Break of Day Boys, who at dawn committed all sorts of excesses against the wretched Roman Catholics, burning their huts and destroying their agricultural implements and produce. The Roman Catholics in return formed themselves into a society of defenders, and from defense, as was natural, proceeded to aggression. During the revolt of 1798, the defenders combined with the United Irishmen, who had initiated the movement. The United Irish were defeated, and their leader, Lord Edward Fitzgerald, having been betrayed by Francis Higgins, originally a potboy and afterwards proprietor of the Freeman's Journal, was taken and condemned to death. But he died of his wounds before the time fixed for his execution. The Society of the United Irish, however, was not dispersed. Its members still continued to hold secret meetings and to reappear in the political arena under the denomination of ribbonmen, so named because they recognized each other by certain ribbons. The ribbonman's oath, which only became known in 1895, was as follows: "In the presence of Almighty God and this my brother, I do swear that I will suffer my right hand to be cut off my body and laid at the jail door before I will waylay or betray a brother, that I will persevere and will not spare from the cradle to the crutch or the crutch to the cradle, that I will not pity the groans or moans of infancy or old age, but that I will wade knee-deep in Orangeman's blood and do as King James did." 661 St. Patrick Boys. These seem to have issued from the ranks of the ribbonmen. Their statutes were discovered and published in 1833. Their oath was, "I swear to have my right hand cut off, or to be nailed to the door of the prison at Armagh, rather than deceive or betray a brother, to persevere in the cause to which I deliberately devote myself, to pardon neither sex nor age, should it be in the way of my vengeance against the Orangemen." The brethren recognized each other by dialogues. "Here is a fine day, a finer one is to come. The road is very bad, it shall be repaired." "What with?" "With the bones of Protestants." "What is your profession of faith?" "The discomfiture of the Philistines." "How long is your stick?" "Long enough to reach my enemies." "To what trunk does the wood belong?" "To a French trunk that blooms in America, and whose leaves shall shelter the sons of Erin." Their aim was chiefly the redress of agrarian and social grievances. 662. The Orangemen. This society, against which the St. Patrick Boys swore such terrible vengeance, was a Protestant society, many farms taken from Roman Catholics having fallen into the hands of Protestants. These latter were, as we have seen, 660, exposed to the attacks of the former. The Protestants, in self-defense, formed themselves into a society taking the name of Orangemen to indicate their Protestant character and principles. Their first regular meeting was held on the 21st of September, 1795, at the obscure village of Loughgall, which was attended by deputies of the Break of Day Boys, 660, and constituted into a grand lodge authorized to found minor lodges. At first, the society had only one degree, Orangeman. Afterwards, in 1796, the purple degree was added. After that, the Markman's degree and the Heroine of Jericho, c. 701, were added, but eventually discarded. The oath varied but little from that of the entered apprentice Mason, for Thomas Wilson, the founder of the order, was a Freemason. The password was Migdol, the name of the place where the Israelites encamped before they passed through the Red Sea, Exodus 14:2. The main password was Shibboleth. The pass sign was made by lifting the hat with the right hand, 3 fingers on the brim, then putting the 3 fingers on the crown and pressing the hat down, then darting off the hand to the front with the thumb and little finger together. This sign having been discovered, it was changed to exhibiting the right hand with 3 fingers on the thigh or knee, or marking the figure 3 with the finger on the knee. This was the half sign. The full sign was by placing the first 3 fingers of each hand upon the crown of the hat, raising the elbows as high as possible and then dropping the hand perpendicularly by the side. This sign was said to be emblematical of the lintels and side posts of the doors, on which the blood of the Passover lamb was sprinkled. The distress word of a brother Orangeman was, "Who is on my side? Who?" 2 Kings 9:32. The grand hailing sign was made by standing with both hands resting on the hips. In the purple degree, the member was asked, "What is your number?" 2.5. The grand main word was Red Walls, the Red Sea. The password was Gideon, given in syllables. The society spread over the whole island and also into England, and especially into the manufacturing districts. A Grand Lodge was established at Manchester, which was afterwards transferred to London, and its Grand Master was no less a person than the Duke of York. At the death of that prince, which occurred in 1821, the Duke of Cumberland, afterwards King of Hanover, succeeded him, both of them men, to have the interests of religion confided to them. In 1835, the Irish statutes, having been revised, were made public. The society bound its members over to defend the royal family so long as it remained faithful to Protestant principles. In the former statutes, there were obligations also to abjure the supremacy of the court of Rome and the dogma of transubstantiation. And although in the modern statutes these were omitted, others of the same tendency were substituted. The society declaring that its object was the preservation of the religion established by law, the Protestant succession of the crown, and the protection of the lives and property of the affiliated. To concede something to the spirit of the age, it proclaimed itself theoretically the friend of religious toleration. But facts have shown this, as in most similar cases, to be a mere illusion. From England, the sect spread into Scotland, the colonies, Upper and Lower Canada, where it reckoned 12,000 members, and into the army, with some 50 lodges. In the United States, the society has latterly been showing its toleration. Its political action is well known. It endeavors to influence parliamentary elections, supporting the Whigs. The efforts of the British House of Commons to suppress it have hitherto been ineffectual. That the custom of indulging in disgraceful mummeries at the ceremony of initiation into this order has not gone out of fashion is proved by an action brought in January 1897 in the Middlesex, Massachusetts Superior Court by one Frank Preble against the officers of a lodge, he having at his initiation been repeatedly struck when blindfolded with a rattan, hoisted on a stepladder and thrown into a sheet, from which he was several times tossed into the air. Afterwards, a red-hot iron was brought to his breast and he was severely burnt. The jury disagreed, but the outside world will not disagree as to the character of such proceedings. Other Irish societies, having for their chief object the redress of agrarian and religious grievances, were the Corders in East and West Meath, the Shanavests and Caravats in Tipperary, Kilkenny, Cork and Limerick, the Whitefeet and Blackfeet and others, which need not be more fully particularized. 663. Molly Maguires. This Irish sect was the successor of the White Boys, the Hearts of Oak and other societies, and carried on its operations chiefly in the west of Ireland. It afterwards spread to America, where it committed great outrages, especially in the far west. Thus, in 1870, the Molly Maguires became very formidable in Utah, where no Englishman was safe from their murderous attacks, and the officers of the law were unable or unwilling to bring the criminals to justice. This led to the formation of a counter-society consisting of Englishmen who united themselves into the Order of the Sons of St. George, who were so successful as to cause many of the murderers to be apprehended and executed, and ultimately the Molly Maguires were totally suppressed. The Order of St. George, however, continued to exist, and still exists, as a flourishing benefit society. It has lodges in Salt Lake City, Ogden, and other towns in Utah. The name of Molly Maguires was afterwards adopted by a secret society of miners in the Pennsylvanian anthracite districts. With the name of their Irish prototypes, they assumed their habits, the consequence of which was that in 1890-10 or 12, members of the society were hanged, and the society was entirely broken up. 664. Ancient Order of Hibernians. This order is widely diffused throughout the United States, where it numbers about 6,000 lodges. It is divided into 2 degrees, in the first of which, counting most members, no oath is exacted and no secrets are communicated. But the second consists of the initiated, bound together by terrible oaths, and who receive their passwords from a central committee, called the Board of Erin, who meet either in England, Scotland or Ireland, and every 3 months send emissaries to New York with a new password. Their avowed object is the protection of Irishmen in America. They receive only Roman Catholics into the society, but they are accused of having given great encouragement and assistance to the Molly Maguires, above spoken of, and also of having greatly swelled the ranks of the Fenians. The bulk, however, of the Hibernians ignore the criminal objects of their chiefs, hence the toleration they enjoy in the States, a toleration they undoubtedly deserve, for they have recently, November 1896, nobly distinguished themselves by providing £10,000 for the endowment of a chair of Celtic in the Roman Catholic University of New York. 665. Origin and organization of Fenianism. The founders of Fenianism were two of the Irish exiles of 1848, Colonel John O'Mahony and Michael Doheny, the latter one of the most talented and dangerous members of the Young Ireland Party, and a fervent admirer of John Mitchell. O'Mahony belonged to one of the oldest families in Munster, but becoming implicated in Smith O'Brien's machinations and failure, he made his escape to France and thence to America, where, in conjunction with Doheny and General Corcoran, he set the Fenian Brotherhood afloat. It was at first a semi-secret association. Its meetings were secret, and though its chief officers were publicly known as such, the operations of the Brotherhood were hidden from the public view. It rapidly increased in numbers, spreading through every state of the American Union, through Canada and the British provinces. But in November 1863, the Fenian organization assumed a new character. A grand national convention of delegates met at Chicago and avowed the object of the Brotherhood, namely the separation of Ireland from England and the establishment of an Irish Republic, the same changes being first to be effected in Canada. Another grand convention was held in 1864 at Cincinnati, the delegates at which represented some 250,000 members, each of which members was called upon for a contribution of $5, and this call, it is said, was promptly responded to. Indeed, the reader will presently see that the leaders of the movement were never short of money, whatever the dupes were. One of the resolutions passed at Cincinnati was that the next convention should be held on Irish soil. About the same time, a Fenian sisterhood was established, and the ladies were not inactive, for in 2 months from their associating, they returned upwards of 200,000 sterling to the Fenian exchequer for the purpose of purchasing arms and other war material. At that period, the Fenians confidently relied on the assistance of the American government. The New York press rather favored this notion. In Ireland, the Brotherhood never attained to the dimensions it reached in the United States, and without the assistance of the latter, could do nothing. Still, the Irish, as well as the American Fenian Association, had its chiefs, officers, both civil and military, its common fund and financial agencies, its secret oaths, passwords and emblems, its laws and penalties, its concealed stores of arms, its nightly drills, its correspondents and agents, its journals, and even its popular songs and ballads. But traitors soon set to work to destroy the organization from within. Thus, the head center O'Mahony, who was in receipt of an official salary of $2,000, is thus spoken of in the official report of the Investigating Committee of the Fenian Brotherhood of America, 1866. After a careful examination of the affairs of the Brotherhood, your committee finds in almost every instance the cause of Ireland made subservient to individual gain. Men who were lauded as patriots sought every opportunity to plunder the treasury of the Brotherhood, but legalized their attacks by securing the endorsement of John O'Mahony. In John O'Mahony's integrity, the confidence of the Brotherhood was boundless, and the betrayal of that confidence, whether through incapacity or premeditation, is not a question for us to determine. Sufficient that he has proved recreant to the trust. Never in the history of the Irish people did they repose so much confidence in their leaders. Never before were they so basely deceived and treacherously dealt with. In fact, the Moffat Mansion, the headquarters of the American Fenians, was not only an almshouse for pauper officials and hungry adventurers, but a general telegraph office for the Canadian authorities and Sir Frederick Bruce, the British minister at Washington. These paid patriots and professional martyrs, not satisfied with emptying our treasury, connived at posting the English authorities in advance of our movements. From this report, it further appears that in 1866 there was in the Fenian treasury in the States a sum of $185,000, that the expenses of the Moffat Mansion and the parasites who flocked thither in 3 months amounted to $104,000, and that Stevens, the Irish head center, in the same space of time received from America In money sent to Paris, the sum of upwards of $106,000, though John O'Mahony in many of his letters expressed the greatest mistrust of Stevens. He no doubt looked upon the latter as the more clever and daring rogue who materially diminished his own share of the spoil. Stevens's career in Ireland is sufficiently well known, and there is scarcely any doubt that whilst he was leading his miserable associates to their ruin, he acted as spy upon them, and that there existed some understanding between him and the English authorities. How else can we explain his living for nearly 2 months in the neighbourhood of Dublin, in a house magnificently furnished, whilst he took no precautions to conceal himself, and yet escaped the vigilance of the police for so long a time? His conduct when at last apprehended, his bravado in the police court and final escape from prison, his traversing the streets of Dublin, sailing for Scotland, travelling through London to France without once being molested, all point to the same conclusion. The only other person of note among the Fenians was John Mitchell, who had been implicated in the troubles of 1848, was transported, escaped, and made his way to the United States. During the Civil War which raged in that country, he was a supporter of the Southern cause, was taken prisoner by the North, but liberated by the President at the request of the Fenians in America. The Fenian agitation also spread into England. Meetings were held in various towns, especially at Liverpool, where men of considerable means were found to support the Fenian objects and organizations. And on one occasion, as much as 200 was collected in a few minutes in the room where a meeting was held. But disputes about the money thus collected were ever arising. The man who acted as treasurer to the Liverpool Centre, when accused of plundering his brethren, snapped his fingers at them and declared that if they bothered him about the money, he would give evidence against them and have the whole lot hanged. The Fenians, to raise money, issued bonds to be redeemed by the future Irish Republic, of one of which the following is a facsimile, seen here. (666). Origin of name. Irish tradition says that the Fenians were an ancient militia employed on home service for protecting the coasts from invasion. Each of the 4 provinces had its band, that of Leinster, to which Fionn and his family belonged, being at the head of the others. This Fionn is the Fingal of Macpherson, and the leaders of the movement no doubt saw an advantage in connecting their party with the historical and traditionary glories of Ireland. But the Fenians were not confined to Erin. The name was invented for the society by O'Mahony, but the Irish never adopted it. They called their association the Irish Republican Brotherhood, or briefly the IRB. Fenianism was officially restricted to the American branch of the movement. 667. Fenian Litany. From the Patriotic Litany of St. Lawrence O'Toole, published for the use of the Fenian Brotherhood, the following extract may suffice. Call to thine aid, most liberty-loving O'Toole, those Christian auxiliaries of power and glory the soul, inspiring cannon, the meek and faithful musket, the pious rifle, and the conscience-examining pike, which, tempered by a martyr's faith, a Fenian's hope, and a rebel's charity, will triumph over the devil, and restore to us our own in our own land forever. Amen. O'Toole, hear us. From English civilization, from British law and order, from Anglo-Saxon cant and freedom, from the hest of the English Queen, from rule Britannia, from the cloven hoof, from the necessity of annual rebellion, from billeted soldiery, from a pious church establishment, O'Toole, deliver us. Fenianism to be stamped out like the cattle plague, we will prove them false prophets, O'Toole. Ireland reduced to obedience, Ireland loyal to the crown, Ireland pacified with concessions, Ireland to recruit the British Army, Ireland not united in effort. It is a falsehood, O'Toole. Ireland never again to be dragged at the tail of any other nation. Proclaim it on high, O'Toole. 668. Events from 1865 to 1871. In speaking of Stevens, it was mentioned that he was a spy on the Fenians, but he was not the only informer that betrayed his confederates to the English government, which latter, in consequence of information thus received, made its first descent on the Brotherhood in 1865 at the office of the Irish people, and captured some of the leading Fenians. Shortly after, it seized Stevens, who, however, was allowed to make his escape from Richmond Prison, where he had been confined in the night of November 24th of the above year. Further arrests took place in other parts of Ireland, and also at Liverpool, Manchester, and other English towns. The prisoners were indicted for treason felony and sentenced to various degrees of punishment. Various raids into Canada and the attempt on Chester Castle, all ending in failure, next showed that Fenianism was still alive. But it was more prominently again brought before the public by the attack at Manchester in September 1867 on the police van conveying two leaders of the Fenian conspiracy, Kelly and Deasy, to the city prison, who were enabled to make their escape, whilst Sergeant Brett was shot dead by William O'Meara Allen, who was hanged for the deed. A still more atrocious and fatal Fenian attempt was that made on the Clerkenwell House of Detention, with a view of liberating two Fenian prisoners, Burke and Casey, when a great length of the outer wall of the prison was blown up by gunpowder, which also destroyed a whole row of houses opposite, killed several persons, and wounded and maimed a great number. On that occasion again, government had received information of the intended attempt by traitors in the camp, but strangely enough failed to take proper precautionary measures. On December 24, 1867, the Fenians made an attack on the Martello Tower at Fota, near Queenstown, Company Cork, and carried off a quantity of arms and ammunition. And their latest exploit in 1871 was another Canadian raid, when they crossed the border at Pembina and seized the Canadian Custom House and Hudson's Bay Post. They were, however, attacked and dispersed by American troops, and General O'Neill was made prisoner. This raid, the object of which was to secure a base of action, and also to receive from the American government a recognition of belligerency, was carried out totally independently of the new Irish Fenian Confederation, of which O'Donovan Rossa was the moving spirit. And the Irish papers therefore pooh-poohed the account of this fiasco altogether, or merely gave the telegrams denying that the enterprise had any connection with Fenianism. About this time, it seemed as if the Fenian Brotherhood was breaking up. O'Donovan Rossa retired from the directory of the Confederation and went into the wine trade. The Fenians themselves denounced the notorious Stevens, who reappeared in America as a traitor and government informer. And though the acquittal of Kelly for the murder of Head Constable Talbot seemed to point to a strong sympathy surviving amongst the Irish people with Fenianism, the jury perhaps could give no other verdict than the one they arrived at, the prosecution having been altogether mismanaged by the government. 669, the soi-disant General Cluseret. Another personage had, in the meantime, become connected with the Fenians, a soi-disant General Cluseret who had been a captain in the French army but had been compelled to quit it in consequence of some irregularity in the regimental funds, of which Cluseret had kept the books and the cash. He afterwards served with Garibaldi in Sicily and Fremont in the United States, after which he bestowed on himself the rank of general. He came to Europe with the mission of reporting to the Fenians of New York on English arsenals, magazines, and ports of entry. In an article published by him in Fraser in 1872 entitled "My Connection with Fenianism," he tells the world that he offered to command the Fenians if 10,000 men could be raised, but the money to do so was not forthcoming. He asserted that he had communications with the Reform League, whose members favored his designs. But he failed, as he says, because he had a knot of self-seekers and ignorant intriguers to deal with. And traitors, he might have added, for it is certain that the intended attack on Chester Castle failed because the English government had had early notice of the plot. A rising Cluseret attempted to head in Ireland came to grief, and the general speedily made his escape to France, where he became mixed up with the Commune, 507. 670 Phoenix Park murders and consequences. Fenianism for a time was quiescent, but about 1880 the Land League was established, and by its agents the Moonlighters entered on a course of outrages, chiefly against farmers for paying rent, which has not yet ceased, though their leader, D. Connell, and a number of his followers, were apprehended early in 1882. This year was further distinguished in the annals of crime by the murder of Lord F. Cavendish, the Chief Secretary for Ireland, and Mr. Thomas Burke, the Under-Secretary in Phoenix Park, Dublin. But the assassins were not apprehended until January 1883, one of the guilty parties, James Carey, having turned informer. He received a pardon and was sent out of the country, but shortly after shot by O'Donnell, who was executed for this murder. The law, of course, cannot sanction the slaying of an informer, but public sentiment says served him right, especially in this case, as Carey was as deeply implicated in the Phoenix Park murders as any of the other criminals. The trial of these led to the disclosure of an organization known as the Irish Invincibles, whose chief was P.J. Tynan, who passed under the sobriquet of Number One, and which organization was the instigator and executor of the Phoenix Park and of many other murders, including, for instance, the massacre of the Mamtrasna family. 671. Dynamite outrages. In this year, 1882, the Fenians began the use of dynamite. A large quantity of this material was discovered, together with a quantity of arms, concealed in a vault in the town of Cork. Later on, the Fenians attempted the storing tip of dynamite and arms in London and other English towns. A considerable number of rifles and large quantities of ammunition were seized in a house at Islington in July 1882. Dynamite was sent to this country from America, but its introduction being difficult, the Fenians attempted to manufacture it here. A laboratory stocked with large quantities of the raw and finished material was discovered at Ladywood, near Birmingham, in April 1883. Still, the explosive and infernal machines continued to be smuggled into this country, and attempts were made to blow up public buildings in London and elsewhere. The attempts, however, doing, fortunately in most cases, but little harm. One of the most serious was the one made at Glasgow early in 1883. In a manifesto issued in April 1884 by the Fenian Brotherhood, signed by Patrick Joyce, secretary, the Fenians call this inaugurating scientific warfare and declare their intention to persevere until they have attained their object, the freedom of Ireland. In December 1884, an attempt to blow up London Bridge with dynamite had no other result but to blow up the two men who made the attempt. The chief instigators of all these attempts were two American organizations. The first was that of O'Donovan Rossa, the second that of the association called the Clan na Gael. Rossa had agents in Cork, London and Glasgow, but two of the most important, Featherstone, whose real name is Kennedy, and Dalton, were apprehended and sentenced to penal servitude for life. Since then, the party of Rossa has been powerless. An unsuccessful attempt on O'Donovan Rossa's life was made early in 1885 by an English lady, a Mrs. Dudley. Within a fortnight after an advertisement appeared in O'Donovan's paper, offering a reward of $10,000 for the body of the Prince of Wales, dead or alive. And yet, but a few months ago, 1896, this would-be assassin or instigator of assassination was permitted to walk about in England in perfect freedom and even to enter the Houses of Parliament. The Clan na Gael is a more serious affair. Originally, it was a purely patriotic scheme for the removal of British power over Ireland. It did not advocate the slaughter of innocent people by the indiscriminate use of dynamite. But eventually, a certain violent faction obtained control and gained possession of the large funds of the clan, the bulk of which they absorbed for their own enrichment. Dr. Cronin, who could have proved this, was murdered. The branches of the Clan na Gael extend over the whole of the United States. Its heads are 3 in number: Alexander Sullivan of Chicago, General Michael Kerwin of New York, and Colonel Michael Boland of the same city. Sullivan was a great friend of Patrick Egan, the treasurer of the Land League. One of the agents of the Clan na Gael was John Daly, who intended to blow up the House of Commons by throwing a dynamite bomb on the table of the House from the Strangers' Gallery. He was arrested at Chester in April 1884 and sentenced to penal servitude for life. The attempts on the House of Commons and the explosions at the Tower and Victoria Railway Station were also the work of the Clan na Gael, 25 members of which have been condemned to penal servitude, 2/3 of them for life. John S. Walsh, residing in Paris, and the Ford family in America are also known as dangerous agents of the association. The dynamiters were not quite so active after the capture and conviction of so many of their party, but confined themselves to occasional and comparatively insignificant attempts. But murder was rife in Ireland. These events, however, are now, thanks to the report of the judges of the Parnell Commission, so easily accessible to every reader that they need not be specified here. 672. The National League. This is scarcely an association, though generally considered such. It is not an Irish production, but created in a foreign land and directed by foreign agents whose designs are unknown. The people have given their allegiance to it because of the large bribes it offered to their cupidity and the fear it inspired. The secret societies give the League their assistance, without which it would be powerless. But the real heads who direct the operations of the rank and file keep carefully out of the way. But whilst the rank and file know they have nothing to fear from the people, who will not give them up, they know that any one of their own body may at any time betray them by turning informer. The Invincibles held their own for a long time, but once the police got hold of them, informers appeared in every direction. This shows, according to Ross of Bladensburg in Murray's magazine, December 1887, from which I quote, that the Irish have no real faith in their own cause, that they are not, like the nihilists, honest patriots, prepared to suffer in a cause they consider just, but a people led astray by a band of selfish agitators, whose machinations are pleasantly exposed in the following passages, with which I will endeavor to give an enlivening finish to this necessarily dry account of the Fenian movement up to 1888. 673. Comic aspects of Fenianism. In the New Gospel of Peace, according to St. Benjamin, an American publication of the year 1867, the author says, "About those days there arose certain men, Padis, calling themselves Fenians, who conspired together to wrest the Isle of Uldarin from the queen of the land of John Bull. Now it was from the Isle of Uldarin that the Padis came into the land of Unculpsam. Although the Padis never had established government or administered laws in Uldariu, they diligently sought instead thereof to have shindies therein, first with the men who sought to establish a government for them, but if not with them, then with each other. Now the Padis in the land of Unculpsam said one to another, Are we not in the land of Unculpsam, where the power of John Bull cannot touch us? And we are many and receive money. Let us therefore conspire to make a great shindi in the Isle of Uldarin. And they took a large upper room, and they placed men at the outside of the outer door, clad in raiment of green and gold, and having drawn swords in their hands. For they said, How shall men know that we are conspiring secretly unless we set a guard over ourselves? And they chose a chief man to rule them, and they called him the Hidsinter, which being interpreted is the top middle, for in the tongue of the Padhis, Hid is top, and Sinter is middle. And it came to pass that after many days the Hidsinter sent out tax gatherers, and they went among the Padis, and chiefly among the Biddies throughout the city of Gotham, and the other cities in the land of Unculpsam, and they gathered tribute, and the sum thereof was great, even hundreds of thousands of pieces of silver. Then the Hidsinter and his chief officers took unto themselves a great house and spacious in the city of Gotham, and fared sumptuously therein, and poured out drink offerings night and day unto the Isle of Uldarin. And they set up a government therein, which they called the government of Uldarin, and chose unto themselves certain lawgivers, which they called the Synodi. Now it came to pass, when certain of the Padis, Fenians, saw that the Hidsinter and his chief officer fared sumptuously every day, and lived as if all their kinsfolk were dying day by day, and there was a waick without end, that their souls were moved witly envy. And they said each within his own heart, Why should I not live in a great house and fare sumptuously? But unto each other and unto the world they said, Behold, the Hidsinter and his officers do not govern Uldarin righteously, and they waste the substance of the people. Let us therefore declare their government to be at an end, and let us set up a new government with a new Hidsinter and a new Synod, even ourselves. And they did so, and they declared that the first Hidsinter was no longer Hidsinter, but that their Hidsinter was the real Hidsinter. And moreover, they especially declared that tribute money should no more be paid to the first Hidsinter, but unto theirs. But the first Hidsinter and his officers would not be set at naught. And so it came to pass that there were 3 governments for the Isle of Uldarin, one in the land of John Bull, and 2 in the city of Gotham in the land of Unculpsam. But when the Fenians gathered unto themselves men, Padis in the island of Uldarin, who went about there in the night time, with swords and with spears and with staves, the governors sent there by the queen of John Bull took those men and cast some of them into prison and banished others into a far country, etc. 674. Events from 1888 to 1896. The revelations made in 1888 and 1890 before the Special Commission have rendered the history of the Fenian conspiracy quite familiar up to that date. Of subsequent events, the following are noteworthy. On the 22nd of October 1890, the Convention of the Fenian Brotherhood in America was held at New Jersey, when it was resolved to make it an open association de facto. It was already so after the disclosures before the Commission, the Council only being bound by oath, and that the object should be to form naval and military volunteer forces to aid the United States in the event of war with any foreign state. At a convention held at New York in July 1891, it was again argued that the only organization now advisable was one with a military basis. The Clan na Gael continued to hold abortive meetings. Outrages of every kind, including murder, were rife in Ireland up to 1892, since which time Ireland is supposed to be pacified, though the frequently repeated dynamite outrages in England and the revival of Fenianism in America would lead to a very different conclusion. As to this revival, the Irish Convention, commonly called the Physical Force Convention, met in September 1895 at Chicago and resolved on the formation of a permanent organization for the recovery by arms of Irish independence. Among the delegates, there were more than 1,000 present were O'Donovan Rossa and Tynan, number 1, and the chairman, Mr. John Finety, ex-member of Congress. In August 1896, a Belfast paper stated that owing to the discovery of a secret society of ribbon men in armor, special detective duty had been ordered by the constabulary authorities at Dublin Castle, and yet in spite of all this, government has recently released some of the most atrocious dynamiters, originally and justly sentenced to lifelong penal servitude. In September 1896, the notorious Patrick Tynan, known under the name of Number 1, and who was implicated in the Phoenix Park murders, was arrested at Boulogne. But the demand of the British government for his extradition was refused by that of France on the grounds that sufficient evidence identifying him with Number 1 had not been produced, that even if such identification were established, there was not sufficient proof to identify Tynan as one of the men who participated in the murder of Mr. Burke, and lastly, that his case was covered by prescription, which in France is acquired after 10 years, an extension to 20 years being allowed only after a trial at which the accused had been present. But Tynan had effected his escape after the murders, and so he was set at liberty by the French government, though it was shown that he had been in frequent communication whilst at Boulogne with English dynamiters, plotting against England at that very time. Of course, the French acted on the strict letter of the Code Napoleon and of the extradition treaty between the two countries. But when the law and the treaty afford such loopholes to the vilest of criminals, it is high time both were revised. On his release from the French prison, Tynan wrote a long letter to his wife, "Why should it be published?" in which he expresses his admiration of Russian civilization and thanks God for tempering the wind to the shorn lamb. Beware of a murderer who gives vent to such language. He is more dangerous than the one who is violent and brutal in his speech. 675. Most recent revelations. One of the dynamiters whom Tynan had been in close and recent communication with was Edward J. Ivory, alias Bell, an American who had been apprehended on British territory and was charged at the Bow Street Police Court on the 13th of November 1896 with conspiring with others to cause dynamite explosions within the United Kingdom. He was committed for trial, but when that took place at the Old Bailey in January 1897, the prosecution, in spite of the fact that the prisoner's movements gave room for very grave suspicions, suddenly collapsed on a purely technical point, and Ivory was, by the judge's direction, pronounced not guilty by the jury, and of course immediately discharged. Were it necessary to vindicate the impartiality of English justice and its tender regard for the interests and claims of a person accused, the issue of this trial would afford a very striking and honorable instance of both. How far the interests of justice, the maintenance of law, and the dignity of the country are served by such verdicts is altogether a different question, the answer to which cannot be satisfactory. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.